In this video, we'll see how to use Google Earth and Photoshop to create axiomatic diagrams like these. Hello and welcome back, and this technique that we'll be seeing today is really easy to do and it's highly effective. You can present your site analysis or design mockups using this technique. All we need is Google Earth, which is free, and Photoshop with no plugins whatsoever. I'm Salman, an architect and illustrator. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon for notification. So let's get started. Let's begin by browsing to our site on Google Earth. So Google Earth has both web version and a pro version, and what we'll need for this diagram is the pro version, which offers more features. I'll leave a link to the pro version in the description of this video. For this example, I'll be choosing the English Bay Area in Vancouver, which has a seaside and some tall buildings, which could make for an interesting diagram. When we browse to a site, we see that the views are almost like SketchUp, and you can change the angle to any way you want. But what we want for this diagram is a proper axonometric view or a view somewhat closer to it. Unfortunately, Google Earth does not come with inbuilt viewpoints to choose like we do in SketchUp or Revit. But there's a solution to that. I found this website called GEarthBlock, and they offer free KML files. So these files will help us get the proper axonometric view that we are intending to make for this diagram. The link to this website is in the description as well. When you browse through this website, you can see that the different field of view that they are offering and how the view will look from each of these angles. For example, when you download this 300-degree view and open it, it will show up on the Google Earth. And all the buildings will look warped and something like a fisheye perspective. So what we need for this diagram is a 10-degree view. So let's download that. Just open it and it will directly open on Google Earth. As you can see, now we have a view that has parallel edges and all the buildings are somewhat in 45-degree view. Let's adjust that a little bit, and this is ready to export. But before we export it as an image, we need to turn off all the names and text in this view. We can do that by turning off the ticks on the left side. So let's turn off the borders and labels, places and roads. So now the image is clean and ready to export. The Save Image button is right on top, and to the left we have a resolution option under which we can change the resolution of the image. I'm choosing a 4K resolution since we'll only be using a small part of this. So let's choose that and save the image. Now let's open the image in Photoshop. The first thing that we'll have to do here is to draw a rectangle. This rectangle represents the base of the diagram that we're trying to make. So we'll reduce the opacity of this rectangle and use the Distort tool to align it with the 45-degree view of the buildings. So right click and distort it and move the edges to match with the parallels. We'll use the buildings on both sides to align the angle of this rectangle, and once it's there, we need to place it exactly where we want to create the diagram. In this case, I want to choose this one tall building and the small buildings in the front. You can also adjust this rectangle without changing the angle by using the direct selection tool on the left side. Let's just extend it towards the sea and make finer adjustments. The next step here is to create a mask. Just hold Ctrl and click on the rectangle layer. This will make a selection of the rectangle. Now choose the map layer and click the mask option below. As you can see, this has selected the area where we want to create the diagram. In case you want to adjust the selection, you can simply redo this process. The next step is to create a base for this diagram. So let's create a new layer below the Google Earth layer. Let's use the polygonal lasso tool, the shortcut L, and create a rectangle parallel to the selection. We will just need to use the paint bucket tool to add a grey color to it, and for both sides of these rectangles, I'm doing them in separate layers. Let's darken them a little bit, and for now, let's add both these layers into a group and rename them as base. The next is an important step, and this is where we'll make the buildings and the diagram look three-dimensional. The idea behind this is pretty simple. We'll be cutting off the edges and the borders of this diagram so that the buildings and the elements pop up, making it appear three-dimensional. Let's just copy the Google Earth image and place it below the mask layer. Reduce the opacity of this a little bit, and we'll be using this layer as the reference to erase the edges. We have this one smaller building on the left side and we need to make it pop up. So let's use the polygonal lasso tool and choose the edges almost like an offset and delete it. Also notice that I'm doing this on the mask of the layer and not on the main layer. If we turn off the reference layer below, you can see that this building is starting to look three-dimensional. Similarly, you can use the eraser tool with the foreground color as white and background as black and draw over it in case you want to add few elements instead of separating them. We are just adding the edges of the building here, and let's move on to the other buildings. So these buildings behind are not regular shaped, so I'm using the eraser tool and notice that the foreground color is now black and background is white. So this will erase off the mask. Now let's do the same thing for the buildings behind, the tall building on the background, and also we have a set of smaller buildings on the far end. So let's select them, adjust the mask and erase the edges. Let's also adjust the base gray layer so that it's updated. Now we also have some trees in the foreground which are getting cut abruptly. So let's pick the mask layer and use the brush tool with the foreground as white and draw over it to bring back the edges. Similarly, on this right side, we notice that the building here is getting cut abruptly. So we either have to complete the building or we have to remove it fully from this view. And removing it will be easier in this case. So let's make a selection of it using the lasso tool, and we can use the content aware fill to remove it. The shortcut for content aware fill is Shift plus F5. Now you can notice that the building is completely gone, and we can also make some adjustments with these trees so that it looks more natural. The trees again are getting cut a bit abruptly. So once again, let's use the brush tool with the foreground as white and brush over the edges to make them look more organic. Once done, we need to adjust the topography of the terrain to make it look more natural. So let's make a selection on the mask layer and make a kind of a slopey terrain and use the brush tool to draw over it. This will give more of a natural feeling to it. Now let's add some textures to the gray base, and we can use the keywords section cut ground texture. So I've picked one of the textures and I'm going to scale it to fit into the base color. Let's also adjust the colors and reduce the saturation. Once done, just bring it below the base layer and hold Ctrl and click between both the layers, and this will create a mask over it. We can then use the distort tool to adjust it in position. Similarly, let's do it on the left side of the base as well. The edges look a little sharper, so let's just make a selection and use a light shade of blue to draw over it. This kind of mimics the reflection of the water. We'll also select the base edges and darken them a bit to look more natural. Let's also add a hue saturation adjustment to make them a little more warmer. There are no set rules here, and you can make adjustments as per your liking. It's almost done here, and we simply need to increase the realism to complete it. For that, I'm just going to add everything into a group and duplicate this group and merge the layer. Let's place the merged layer below the base one, reduce the opacity of it, and just erase off to kind of mimic the effect of reflection. We'll do the same on the left side of the face as well. We'll now need to add shadows, so let's create a new layer. Use the lasso tool to make a selection as a ground plane and use the gradient tool with a light shade of grey to add these shadows. Let's also erase the edges of the shadows to make them look more natural. I'm using a multiply layer to just darken a few edges on the diagram, and also a new layer with the blend mode and overlay to add some contrast in some edges. Let's top it off with some illustrative elements. I'm using some bird PNGs to add into the diagram. The base can be a little darker, so I'm using a new layer and a soft grey brush to add these edges. We can also add some white overlays on the water to give some highlight. And finally, let's add some text to highlight them. So I'm just going to type in Google Earth and right click and choose the skew command to match it with the same angle as the diagram. You can then type in the titles, adjust the colors, font styles to match as per your liking. Let's also use the pen tool to add some arrows and finally some text for labels. And this is the final result. So that was it from this technique, and what we saw today was pretty much the basics. You can build over it to create something more unique. I hope you found this video to be helpful, and if you did, please hit that like button and share this with your friends. Comment down below if you got any questions and I'll be happy to answer them. You can follow me on Instagram and the handle is right here. I'll see you on the next one.